I'm sitting at my desk at work, doing what I'm good at, and everything looks normal. Then I hear a group behind me start laughing, and my body reacts before my brain can catch up. My shoulders tighten, my stomach drops. I pretend I didn't notice, but I'm already listening for what comes next. I tell myself it's not about me, it's just coworkers joking around, but my hands still go stiff like I'm back in school again. That night I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the email from my old school, asking me to speak at career day, and my first instinct was to delete it and pretend I never saw it. I told myself I was too busy, that someone else could go, that it wasn't a big deal. But the truth was, I didn't want to walk back into the place where I learned to stay quiet. I kept thinking about those hallways and how small I used to feel in them, and I realized if I said no now, I'd just be doing the same thing I did back then, avoiding it and calling that strength. So I wrote back and said yes. I remember how it started in that hallway, just regular noise and lockers and students moving around. And then Zeke stepped in front of me like it was a game, and I already knew the part I was supposed to play. He didn't have to shove me hard to make his point, just enough to make everyone look. Rena stood there smiling, holding up her phone, and I felt my face get hot while I tried to pick up my books without saying anything. I kept telling myself if I stayed quiet it would be over faster, but staying quiet just made it easier for them to keep going. One day, after class, I stood by Miss Heron's desk, waiting for the room to clear out so I could finally say something about what was happening. My voice felt small even to me, but I told her they were pushing me around and calling me names, and I didn't know how to make it stop. She barely looked up from her papers.
They're just joking. Try not to take it so seriously.
I nodded like I understood, but what I really heard was that this was my problem to handle on my own. I built a life that looks solid from the outside. I lead projects, I solve problems, and people trust me with things that matter. Dr. Nia told me I should be proud of how far I've come, and I nodded because that's what you do when someone believes in you. But even standing there in my own workshop, hearing my team laugh at something harmless, I still felt that old tension crawl up my back. It didn't matter how many degrees I had or how many bridges I designed, because part of me was still that kid measuring every room for danger before I spoke. When I pulled into the parking lot at Ridgewood that morning, I told myself this was just another speaking event, nothing more than a schedule on my calendar. But the building looked smaller than I remembered, and heavier at the same time, like it was holding on to things I never dealt with. And I had to remind myself that I wasn't 12 anymore, even if part of me still felt like I was walking back into something I never finished. I was halfway down the hallway when I heard a group of students laughing, and it didn't even matter that they weren't looking at me because my body reacted like it was. My chest tightened, my steps slowed, and suddenly I was scanning the room the way I used to, trying to figure out if I was about to be the punchline. I knew I was there as a guest, a professional, someone they invited, but that didn't stop the old instinct from taking over. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about my speech anymore. I was just trying to steady my breathing and remind myself that this was a different time and a different room. I stepped into the restroom and locked myself in a stall like I used to, telling myself I just needed a minute to get it together. I could hear the faint echo of voices out in the hallway, and my heart was beating harder than it should have been for something so small. I leaned back against the door and counted my breaths, trying to slow everything down, trying to convince myself that I wasn't in danger. It frustrated me that after all these years, after everything I've built, I still had to fight this same reaction like it was waiting for any excuse to come back. When I looked up at my reflection in that mirror, I didn't just see myself as I am now. I saw the kid I used to be standing there, with the same tight shoulders and the same question in his eyes. I realized I've spent years pretending that what happened back then was small, that it didn't matter anymore, but he was still carrying it. I felt this wave of guilt for leaving him there, for building a life on top of something I never actually faced. In that quiet stall, I finally admitted that he wasn't weak for being hurt, and I wasn't weak for still feeling it. I stood there for a second, with my hand on the restroom door, knowing I still had time to leave and nobody would question it. I could have blamed it on nerves or a scheduling mistake and driven back to my workshop like this visit never happened. But I knew that walking away would just be the same pattern all over again. choosing silence because it feels safer in the moment. So I took a breath, opened the door, and stepped back into the hallway. Not because I suddenly felt fearless, but because I was tired of letting fear decide what I do next. I walked onto that stage and started with the safe version of my story, the projects I've led and the things I've built, because that's what people expect at events like this. Then I saw a small hedgehog kid a few rows back shrinking into his seat, while two older students leaned in close and laughed, and it felt too familiar to ignore. In that moment, I knew I couldn't keep talking about success without talking about what it cost me to get here. So I stopped reading my notes, looked up at the room, and decided to tell them what school actually did to me before I ever built anything. I stepped down from the stage and walked straight toward the third row because I didn't want this to stay theoretical. I looked at the two students who were leaning over that kid and told them to stop immediately. I didn't raise my voice, but I made sure they heard me, and then I turned to the kid and told him he wasn't the problem, and he didn't deserve to be treated like that. In that moment, I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone or make a speech. I was doing what I wish someone had done for me, which was simply step in and make it clear that this wasn't normal, and it wasn't okay. After the assembly ended, that kid found me near the exit and just stood there for a second like he wasn't sure what to say. He handed me a small note that simply said, "Thank you." And I realized that sometimes that's all it takes to change the direction of a day. When I went back to my workshop later and heard my team laughing again, I felt the sound move through me differently this time. My shoulders didn't tighten and my chest didn't lock up, because I understood something I didn't before, that not every laugh is a threat, and I don't have to shrink to stay safe anymore.
A narrow hall, a quiet frame, walls that held unspoken weight, footsteps moving carefully, breath held in a crowded space, eyes that turned and looked away.